Are the Philadelphia Eagles set at the linebacker position for 2023? Are they confident in their starters? Could they trade for a veteran? Could they draft a prospect higher than we think? All that and more on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase. You can find our podcast Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today on the show, we're going to talk about a position that, I feel like we've kind of been ignoring over the last few weeks, really since the Eagles made some moves in free agency and tried to let free agents walk. It's the linebacker position. We've gone through mock drafts and have barely ever taken a linebacker. And if we have, it hasn't been any pick outside of a 7th round flyer at the end, like our first, second, and third round selections. I don't think we've ever taken a linebacker on mock draft Monday. Haven't really discussed a lot of the prospects or, any potential trade candidates, pretty much anything. And it's understandable as to why, right? The big news was, of course, Kyzir White leaving for the Arizona Cardinals, TJ Edwards signing with the Chicago Bears, Nakobe Dean time. You sign Nicholas Morrow from the Chicago Bears. The Eagles don't invest a lot else in linebackers, so they normally don't take the position high in the draft. We know they really don't care about it all that much, comparatively speaking, when it comes to, linebacker versus receiver, or corner, or edge rusher, offensive tackle. It's night and day. So for a lot of these reasons, we haven't really been highlighting this position for a few weeks, but I do want to get into some linebacker talk on today's show because there is a veteran now potentially on the trade market that could interest the Eagles. I think some fans have been talking about it the last few days. I want to get into as well, what are the chances they do take a linebacker in the draft, because Gino and I, again, have not really addressed it all that much. We would both predict that they go with positions that they prioritize more. But at the same time, they did take Davian Taylor in the 3rd round in 2020. They did take Nakobe Dean in the 3rd round in 2022. So it's not like they're totally opposed to taking linebacker within the first 3 rounds. So got to get into what the chances are and what their confidence level is in Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow for 2023. But I want to start this conversation with the veteran trade talk that I brought up before, because the other day there was a trade request from a pretty well-known player, a linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a former first-round pick, a Super Bowl champion, an explosive linebacker that has some of the best closing speed at the position, if not the fastest linebacker in football. It's Devin White. Devin White, according to reports, has requested a trade from Tampa Bay. White has been with Tampa Bay for 4 years now. He's currently on that 5th-year option part of the first-round rookie contract, going to make $11 million in 2023. He wants a trade. He wants a change of scenery. I'm sure he wants a new contract extension, and considering the Buccaneers are probably hot and cold with White, they're probably not sure if they want to commit to him. And so it's interesting. I think when it comes to the Eagles' perspective of this is kind of what they do. Hey, let's find a young player with a ton of upside that maybe fell out of favor with his team for one reason or another, but we could, buy low on this guy and, reap the benefits of it. Even if it's only for 1 year, we can, it's like what happened with Jay Ajayi and Timmy Jernigan and Ronald Darby and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Howie Roseman likes these, low risk, high reward moves. So in that way, I guess it would make sense. They need linebacking help for sure. I think, Dean and Morrow is probably an okay duo next year, but, Devin White could be an upgrade for sure. His explosiveness, as I said, is incredible. He is an elite blitzing linebacker. In this way, if it doesn't cost a lot, if it costs you like a 4th or 5th round pick, yeah, kick the tires on him. I think it would make sense for sure if the price was right. And even if he's only a 1-year rental and he signs a deal next year with another team, you get another compensatory pick for 2025. I understand the logic to it, and I'm not totally opposed to it. I think Devin White's speed is very, very intriguing if the price is right. But at the same time, I really can't see this move happening for Philadelphia for a couple reasons. Number one, outside of, as I said, he's like an elite blitzing linebacker, might be the fastest linebacker in the open field when he's playing at his maximum effort, which is an issue at times, or at least it has been in the past in Tampa Bay. At the same time, when you look at his Pro Football Focus numbers in other areas, against the run, in coverage, it's not good. Pretty much his entire career since being a first-round pick in 2019, Devin White has not been graded highly in the run game or in coverage. And the coverage part is disappointing because, as I said, this kid is an absolute athlete. He can fly downhill. He's so good getting to the quarterback. But when it comes to running from sideline to sideline, when it comes to, the awareness in zone and in man coverage as well, the production, the results have not been there on the field. The potential is there, but you have not seen the results. So again, if the Eagles want a buy low kind of move on a young player that's a former first round talent and it doesn't cost you a lot and it helps you this year, I totally get it. But again, he hasn't really been great on the field and they don't love to invest a lot of assets in linebacker. Like even if they, bought low on him and it was only one draft pick, you'd also have to pay him $11 million this year on that fifth-year option. You're going to have to trade picks. Even if they're lower picks, you're going to have to give up assets. So you got to pay $11 million. You got to give up draft picks. And if you want to keep him long-term, you got to give him an extension, which the Eagles just really don't love to do at this position. And I don't think it would only cost a fifth-round selection for Tampa Bay to give up Devin White. Again, has he been elite on the field where he warrants a first or second-round pick? Hell no. Nobody's trading that kind of pick for a linebacker unless your name's Fred Warner. So he's not going to command that kind of market. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to cost you like a, compensatory, or I shouldn't say compensatory, a conditional is the right word, a conditional seventh. I think it would probably be along the lines of what you gave up for, a Robert Quinn, a Jay Ajayi in the past, a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, a Ronald Darby, maybe a third round pick, a fourth rounder. And again, that's not terrible. I would be okay with that, but I can't see the Eagles doing that, paying him double-digit million dollars this year with $11 million on the books and potentially considering an extension. I don't know. I don't think it's likely. The production just doesn't match that kind of combination of assets to give up for a position. Again, the Eagles I think they think they're probably fine, and they think they can get through with Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow. Are we confident in that duo in 2023? I want to get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, and it's sponsored today by Ultimate Pro Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game for a year now, and it's been so much fun to play. I love playing the role of a general manager. You can tell by this podcast, all the mock drafts we've done, the offseason simulations, all the speculation, but it's not as easy to be a GM and create a dynasty as you might think. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms, navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, all the ups and downs of a season, all in this challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want, when you want to. Locked On Eagles listeners, you get a 100% free boost to your franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. All right, Eagles fans, we are continuing on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, and we're talking about the linebacker position, kind of getting into if the Eagles would consider a trade for Devin White. I think the price would have to be right. It would have to be a fifth round pick, a sixth or seventh rounder. And even then, I don't know if they would do it. Devin White has struggled on the field in 4 years with Tampa Bay in the run game, in coverage. It would cost them $11 million this year with that fifth-year option. They would have to consider a contract extension if they're going to give up those kind of assets for this kind of player, which I can't see them doing at linebacker, even with Devin White's potential. So again, maybe they would do this and it's a 1-year rental and then he cashes in next year with another team and boom, that's what Howie likes to do with linebacker is, get cheap talent that can give him some good play for nothing. And then when they outplay that contract, he lets them walk and he tries to do it all over again. That's really been Howie's strategy at linebacker. And it's worked at times. It worked with Nigel Bradham. It worked with Kyzir White. And sometimes it didn't work. It didn't work with, what was his name? Corey Nelson. It didn't work with Zach Brown. It didn't work with Eric Wilson, but that's his strategy. Maybe Devin White lines up with that. I would predict he doesn't. I think who lines up with it is who he already signed. Nicholas Morrow from the Chicago Bears. He's going to be the starter, I think, next to Nakobe Dean in 2023. Are we confident in those two for 2023 as the starters? I think I am. And again, they do need depth at linebacker, even if they don't trade for Devin White, even if they don't take a prospect in the second or third round. I would imagine, this is a thin position outside of these two guys and Dean and Morrow. Who do you got? You got Sean Bradley. And after that, it gets pretty thin outside of just, special teams aces. So they're going to definitely need to, Davian Taylor, of course, still with this team. He was on the practice squad all of last year. They're going to definitely need to invest some picks or, undrafted rookies or who knows, maybe it's a buy low trade or another free agent signing after the draft at this spot because you did lose both your starters in TJ Edwards and Kyzir White, which is not ideal. That was definitely your best linebacking play last year with Edwards and White since 2017 and 2018 with Nigel Bradham, Jordan Hicks, and Michael Kendricks. So yeah, it's not a great spot to be in at linebacker when you lose both of those guys and you're very thin. But I would say I'm totally fine with Dean and Morrow. I think Edwards and White last year, they were good, but they weren't great by any stretch of the imagination. Even TJ Edwards, I thought was incredible last year when it comes to the growth he, took in coverage, he made in coverage, but I don't think he wasn't a first team all pro type of player. He wasn't somebody worth, giving out a massive extension to. That's why Chicago really didn't even pay him that much. And then when it comes to Kyzir White, he was good, but he was kind of, disappearing in the second half of the year where, again, he wasn't getting beat really bad in the open field. He wasn't missing a lot of tackles, but he wasn't making a lot of impact plays either. So they were a solid, peaceful presence at this position that has not been great for the Eagles in years past, but I don't think they did anything last year that Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow are not capable of. And honestly, I think the ceiling of these two is a lot higher because Nakobe Dean, I think, can great. Great. They were never going to be top tier players at this position. I genuinely believe that Nakobe Dean could be a star at linebacker. You got to remember, this was a top linebacker prospect in 2022, and he only fell to the third round because of these phantom injury concerns. Long term, he was healthy for the entire season last year. But when you look at the pre-draft process last year from January to April, who were the two linebackers we said could go in the first round? It was Devin Lloyd from Utah, who was a first-round pick and went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it was Nakobe Dean coming out of Georgia. We were all shocked to see that he fell out of the first round and the second round. The fact that he was there in the third round was absolutely incredible. So this is a prospect that normally the Eagles would never come close to getting because they would never consider taking him at the value that he normally would be at in the draft because of his talent, which would be a first or second round selection. They're never willing to consider linebacker that early. So when we talk about Nakobe Dean and Devin Lloyd and in past classes, we say great players, but they'll never be Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles actually got a top linebacker prospect in a draft because he fell. So he actually does have an elite ceiling that I think Edwards and White did not have. So again, it's not ideal to lose both your starters. They're thin. They need to address this position in some way, but I'm fine with Dean and Morrow. Even if you don't trade for a Devin White, if these are your two guys, and heck, I even like Sean Bradley more than most. So does Geno. I think he could be a good LB3. I think he's a fine third primary backup at this position. So I think Nakobe Dean, his potential, his star power, on top of Nicholas Morrow being fine. I think he can be what, again, it's not a very high bar to do what Kyzir White did last year. Just don't be Nate Geary. You know what I mean? Like, Nicholas Morrow can be Kyzir White. He had a solid Pro Football Focus coverage grade last year in Chicago. He's healthy and reliable, played every snap for the Bears on defense last year. Is he going to be a star? No. But can he be Kyzir White from 2022? Absolutely. So I'm totally fine with Dean and Morrow. And I would even say, because of Dean's ceiling, this year's duo actually has a higher ceiling than last year. Does it have a lower floor? For sure. But I think it actually does have a higher ceiling. So we've ignored linebacker a lot in our mock drafts, but I could definitely see the Eagles addressing this position in some way. I think they're good with their starters. I don't think they trade for Devin White, but definitely don't rule out linebacker in the draft. Again, we've gone more receiver, heck, even tight end, and running back. Pretty much taken everything in these mock drafts, but we haven't really gone linebacker. I could see, even though I like Dean and Morrow, and I think they do too, I could see them consider it maybe in the third round. They did take Davian Taylor. They did take Nakobe Dean in that round. So they're not totally, closed off to that idea. And Morrow's only on a 1-year contract. I would say they don't take one until later on in the draft, but I don't think it's off the table for sure. I think they're fine, though, at linebacker. I really do. Is it the weakest position, though, on this roster? Is it running back? We'll get into that coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles, getting into a lot of linebacker talk, doing pretty much a whole show of it because we never really talk about this position because, again, Howie Roseman, I would say outside of running back, linebacker, and honestly, Howie Roseman invests more in running back than he does in linebacker. That's the position that I think he cares about the least, or he invests the least amount of premier assets in. Because even running back, he took Miles Sanders, Howie Roseman, that is when I'm talking about, he took Miles Sanders in the second round in 2019, traded a 4th round pick for Jay Ajayi, signed Jordan Howard. He has definitely made moves to try to be, and even I would say, like in 2017, he considered Christian McCaffrey in the first round if he would have fell down the board. He wanted Dalvin Cook in the second round. At linebacker, when was the last time Howie Roseman considered spending a top 2 round pick on a guy, signing somebody to a big contract, trying to trade for somebody? Really never. Again, he likes to go for the buy low, cheap 1-year, prove it guys that can maybe outplay that contract and then go elsewhere, and then you try it over again. So I think linebacker is a position that he really does care the least about. And I think that's why it's not a coincidence that you look at this roster right now, which is loaded with star power. I think linebacker and again, I'm good with Dean and Morrow. I think they could be good, but it's clearly the weakest position on this team. And then on offense, it's running back. I think Rashad Penny could be really good this year. I like what I saw from Kenneth Gainwell in the playoff run last year. Boston Scott, Trey Sermon, that could be a good 4-man rush at running back. And maybe you draft a guy late. So I think both positions do have some upside and they'll be fine this year, but it's not a coincidence that you look at the roster, it is weakest at the 2 positions that I think Howie invests the least in. But the good thing is these positions can be elevated by what's in front of them and what's behind them. That's part of why you're not really that worried. Could Rashad Penny get hurt this year and Kenneth Gainwell be average or the regular season of 2022 version of Kenny G? And, Boston Scott's not a bell cow running back, and who knows what Trey Sermon could be. Sure, that could be a possibility. Could Nakobe Dean get hurt or not live up to his potential and Nicholas Morrow is just a guy? For sure. But that's never going to tear down this team. They've had bad running backs before, a bad running back situation, 2018. And guess what? They were a few plays away from the NFC Championship game. They've had bad linebacker play, 2019, 2021. Guess what? They were still playoff teams that won the division or got into the wild card round. So these aren't positions that are going to kill them. Howie knows that. It's why they're the weakest positions on the team. And at linebacker, like having an elite front, having an elite defensive line, that's going to help linebacker. Having elite cornerbacks and safeties behind them, that's going to help linebacker. They're sandwiched in between a bunch of studs on this defense. On offense, running back's going to get helped out a lot by an elite mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts and an elite offensive line and elite passing targets like Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert. So, yeah, I think linebacker and running back, clearly the two weakest positions of the team. But it's not a coincidence. That's how Howie purposefully designed this roster. And I do think even though they are the weakest, they're going to be okay. Because if Rashad Penny stays healthy, he's one of the most efficient running backs in football. Kenneth Gainwell took some massive steps in the playoffs last year, and he's a very reliable receiving running back. Nakobe Dean, again, was a top linebacker prospect last year that only fell because of injury concerns. Nicholas Morrow is a very reliable player. So I think they're going to be okay at these spots. And I would say later on in the draft, you'll probably see them address these positions. All right, Eagles fans, that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us a part of your day. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. Make sure your second listen now is the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with the draft dudes from free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting as well as Locked On Eagles and all our Locked On podcasts on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Birds and at DiBiase LOE. We'll see you tomorrow for another edition of the show. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.